the problem of political lack of a common goal. Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Superflu. Deemed superflu by NBC News. I don't know if that's like a taxonomical term, but that's what they're calling it. So there's the H3N2 flu virus out now, coming to a public place near you, or coming to Grandma's house, hopefully not Grandma's house. There is high or very high flu activity in 29 states as of the closing days of 2025. First question, just impressions. Is it time to pump the brakes on social gathering and do a little social distancing?
All social gatherings carry some risk. They just always have for spreading disease. People get colds, they get any number of things. It's always a question of how much risk you're willing to engage in for talking with anyone. The flu vaccine does in fact exist. It's not as if it doesn't exist, so people can go and get the flu vaccine. It's not, but maybe not put the brakes on social gatherings, but the old COVID rules could apply. Just if you got a face mask, maybe wear a face mask. COVID's still on about, but if you wash your hands, maybe engage in a little bit of social distancing. But the flu has been with us for a long time. It's not going away. It's
Right.
never. I don't it doesn't seem like it's that much worse. Yes, it's worse now, but it's not like the worst thing in the world. It's just really bad.
So I heard someone aptly describe COVID at a New Year's Eve party, which I left at 7 p.m. as a new parent. I heard someone aptly describe COVID as you, referring to someone healthy under the age of 50, get a sore throat, but then it kills grandma. And I was like, yeah, not all the time, but that's the fear.
Yeah, the sick, the immunocompromised, those who, when they get sick badly or like worse, yeah, they face the worst threats from COVID.
Whereas the Spanish flu pandemic targeted the young and healthy because of a cytokine storm. With COVID, it was more trouble to the vulnerable and the aged. Do you know if that's similar with the flu, or if it's kind of like the Spanish flu?
It follows the progress of all contagious diseases, right? Those who are more susceptible to being harmed by the flu will be harmed more by the flu. That, especially as you get older, your body has less resistance to certain things. So this is any disease though. The cold can take someone out if it gets bad enough. Any kind of contagious disease, really. That's part of the reason that vaccines are so important, is that they help to reduce the spread of these diseases. But once someone has a disease, it's going to take its course, right? The flu is a disease like any other. It's going to run its course for somebody, and you can either treat it a little bit or a lot and not hope for the best, but endure it. And not everybody, unfortunately, survives. They have fatalities every year from the flu all over the world. So what can you say? Part of the issue is the access to healthcare. If we're going to be frank about this, that because the Obamacare subsidies just doubled for a lot of people, they may forego going to the doctor early enough if they get flu symptoms to get treated effectively. That is an issue that certainly occurs this year. That's new, right? Is that millions of people who might have gone to the doctor earlier for preventive care or for getting checked out, or if symptoms start occurring, so they could help to slow the spread of the flu by knowing who has it and treating it, may show up later or not at all to medical providers, to the emergency room, or to doctors, because they're declining to pursue care due to the cost of that care. And that's something other countries have figured out, frankly, that the US, I don't know why we're not at this place, that if you don't provide affordable access to everybody, that the situation gets worse for everybody, because we all get affected by the spread of contagious disease, even those who have access to care. That The virus mutates, the more hosts it has to mutate within. If people keep getting sicker and sicker because they don't have access to medicine, they don't have access to the vaccine, they don't have access to the resources to detect the spread of this contagious disease, then a bad situation becomes worse. That's probably the biggest argument for universal healthcare is that it removes that element of stress, it removes that element of doubt of can I afford this? And there's some segment of the population that if they cannot afford to do a thing, will not do it, period. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
don't make it free and accessible for everybody, or at least low cost enough that it's accessible to most people, then there's going to be an increase. It's just basic logic, right? Sick people get sicker, then not sick people face a higher risk of getting sicker. Because it's not as if people who are sick stop going on public transportation or stop going to jobs or that they feel they can call in sick, especially for low income jobs. No way. There's lots of jobs where people feel they cannot call in sick no matter what, and so they just show up sick. And that's a societal issue. That's a cultural problem that in America we work way too much, way too long hours, and that there's this constant fear, this sort of nagging fear at the back of everyone's minds that takes vacation, that takes a sick day, that they're like it's some kind of moral failing or something to the work ethic to do that and that they risk getting fired. And in some cases that fear is actually warranted. They're not there's states where it's a right to work state. There's no real legal protections for workers that an employer can fire them for any reason or no reason at all. They just don't like them and they can, here's the door. And one way that a person generates a reputation not being liked is that if they were scheduled to show up and they don't because they're sick,
Mm-hmm.
they get that reputation of being someone who gets sick, someone who doesn't show up. And it sucks because that the way you get a sicker society is when sick people keep showing up when they should not be, when they should be recuperating and recovering at home, not on buses and trains and planes. You don't want
Right.
someone with the flu, or the one I think of a lot is tuberculosis or typhoid Mary. The people who are told explicitly, don't do it. Don't go into public places. Don't go to these places. And they feel they have to anyways because they have to work to live. That our society fails in this regard for sure, that people who are sick or have very contagious diseases, we don't provide them a way to escape the pressures of life. Like, here's some money to just not, right? Instead, they become homeless or they face bankruptcy or they lose their job. And it just spirals and cascades out of control till you get a point where there's like very sick people showing up to the emergency room or to the like last step on the way down, and everybody else also faces getting very sick on the way there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Collectively we could do a much better job of helping people who need help. Medicaid is supposed to serve that role, but people fall through the cracks. And this big, beautiful bill that just passed, the one that includes those Medicaid job requirements, we talked about this. That's going to be a huge barrier for a lot of people, right? If they're chronically sick or ill, how do you get a job if employers don't want to hire someone who's obviously sick, right? What do you do? And if you can't get access to healthcare, you just get sicker, right? If the emergency room doesn't treat the long-term symptoms, they treat whatever's in front of them. And the requirement, as far as I understand, is just to stabilize someone. It's not necessarily to cure them.
Yeah, a bus is no place to recover. The picture you paint is reminds me again of Les Miserables, and with you're in trouble, and then you do something, and you get in more trouble as a result. Just a step downward. You can't take time off work because you don't want to be seen as the sick person, so you show up to work and you become the sick person, and others do too. I didn't want to interrupt you. I've got some facts to present about causes of death, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay, causes of death. So I'm looking at the CDC website. It lists causes of death. In the US, I believe this is for 2023. Heart disease in the US, 681,000. Cancer, 613,000. Accidents, including unintentional injuries, 223,000. Stroke, 163,000. Chronic lower respiratory disease, 145,000. Alzheimer's disease, 114,000. Diabetes, 95,000. Things I don't know how to pronounce, but I looked up, it's kidney disease, 55,000. Chronic liver disease and cirrhosis, 52,000. COVID-19, 50,000. And then not listed on there, but it's just below it. If you go to families fighting flu, it says flu is still serious. Between 2010 and 2020, there were between 12,000 and 52,000 deaths annually from the flu. So similar to that of COVID when comparing it to 2023 COVID data. It can still vary a lot, COVID data can. It was much higher, like about 10 times that or so in 2021. Don't quote me on that. So it was something like that in 2020, 2021. And it could go up again, knock on wood. This is a major cause of death. If we consider that... Oh, and I was going to add one other thing for context. According to the Department of Transportation, in 2021, 43,000 people were killed in motor vehicle crashes, including 7.4 thousand who were walking. This could be included, probably is included in accidents, because those are accidents. So all of these are very serious threats to life and limb, and thus to the safety and welfare of the American people. And it sounds like what we have is a culture of keeping mum about one's illnesses. And I think that sort of speaks to the general precarity of a lot of people in this society. Can't take a day off, but then when you don't take a day off, you need 3 days off. And then you don't get the preventative medicines, and you can't stay away. You can't get outdoors in January. You can, but people don't. Not as much. They're indoors in the winter. That's when the viruses spread the most. November through, I don't know, February. Who knows? Through March it kind of tapers off from the days when I was studying this, when I was keeping note of this more actively. So, can't do anything about it, supposedly, and then we all suffer from it. And it just speaks to me the general precarity of situation that a lot of people face.
It's terrible. I also, when you're talking about some of those causes of death, I'm thinking about death from overwork. There was a news story a few years back about a woman who was working 3 jobs, and she essentially had a heart attack in her car because she was so stressed from working for so many hours that her body just couldn't take it. And then there was that Goldman Sachs intern a few years back who died in the shower because they were working, I think it was 18 or 20 hours a day or something, some obscenely high amount of hours that they were working, and they just died. They died in the shower. But Japan's actually notorious for this, of people who have death from overwork, where they just work so many hours because there's a cultural requirement, at least in Japan, that you don't leave the office until your boss leaves the office. And if your boss doesn't leave the office for 18 hours or whatever, then you're there, right? And so that's the other side of this coin, that you need to work to make enough money to get access to healthcare. But working too much means that even healthcare won't save you, right? Because working so much leads to high levels of stress, hypertension, stroke, heart attack, high cholesterol. A lot of work is sedentary. So people are sitting in chairs, computers all day. And there's sad stories of people dying at their desks, having a heart attack. Probably the saddest that I saw related to that was an office that took a picture of a guy who died thinking he was sleeping, and everyone's smiling and happy and laughing, and this guy's dead right in front of them who had a heart attack, and they thought he was sleeping. And it's, whoa, what is going on here? That people are working so much that they don't even get checked for like chronic conditions like heart disease and all this other stuff. That, I think, is something that stands out for, especially, look, the US is a very wealthy country. They have the tools available if they really wanted to provide even basic medical services to anyone who needs it, basic screenings, any number of other things. but they don't. It's all segmented. So certain parts of the society get access to a lot of healthcare. The seniors through Medicare, the very poor through Medicaid. The military is a socialized system. So I was a military dependent, full medical, dental, vision, right? TRICARE was very good insurance. I needed an emergency appendectomy. I go to the hospital. I get the surgery that day. I pay very little because TRICARE covered almost all of it. And that's the thing that when the government covers insurance, healthcare providers are reticent to push the issue of got to charge as much money as humanly possible because it's a huge provider, right? The check clears and the government can say no, right? They don't. They're gonna. That's the whole selling point of something like universal healthcare is if you have a single negotiating entity, right? It becomes very difficult for these medical providers to charge exorbitant amounts of money because they're the only business in town, right? If they are the only option for making money other than private insurance, then it becomes very difficult to say, no, I'm not going to provide medical services to even the very poorest of people because this is how I make money. That's
Hmm.
the sort of untold part of this is that not even untold. It's part of the debate and the discussion is that the system we have right now in the United States makes some people very rich, but it's at the expense of almost everyone else. And
Hmm.
other countries caught on to this and they have much better systems in place to provide much better access to care and much better care at a much, much lower cost. We're talking orders of magnitude. So we pay 2 times as much or 3 times as much for medicine and services, and we get a less ideal outcome. So what are we paying for? We're paying for yachts and we're paying for high stock prices. Okay, is that what we value? We don't value the actual health outcomes as much. That's the confusing part of all of this.
I remember in the 90s, maybe it extended into the early aughts. Sometimes when people would say goodbye to you, they would say, "Hey, don't work too hard." And I thought of that in terms of a culture of overwork. At least we don't have the 996 like China, where they work from 9 in the morning until 9 at night and 6 days a week. Some professions, probably tech and such. But some people work harder than that. Yeah, working or going to work when you're sick. I don't know, but a lot of people don't have the option. A lot of people are just, they're in a critical role, so I guess don't work too hard if you can help it.
Look, it's a difficult situation because a huge issue that people face is the prospect of homelessness. Say
Mm.
someone's gainfully employed, but then they become homeless, the risk increases of getting fired from a job if someone is
Right.
homeless. And people are left in these very difficult situations where they have to do I work even when I'm sick so I have somewhere to live, or do I risk the prospect of losing both my home but then my job because I don't have a safe place to wash clothes, to maintain basic hygiene, right, to stay clean. Also, it's just way more stressful and difficult to hold a job if you're homeless because there's the constant, as you said, precarity that life is scary and dangerous on the streets and even in shelters, right? And that level of unpredictability and uncertainty can lead to less than stellar job performance, put it that way.
Yeah.
That you've got that sort of constant nagging fear in the back of one's mind. I have enough money to stay in my home, to not get evicted, and it's just all very traumatizing as well. If you want to talk about things like PTSD, what's more traumatizing than losing your home and then being forced to fend for yourself in the elements, in the cold, and the rain, and the heat against other people that try to rob you, or worse? The U.S. has real issues, I think, with the very lowest income level quartile of providing that sort of bridging opportunity to climb to even get on the ladder to climb it, right? That the barrier to entry for even like the lowest level of employment is actually very steep. There are exceptions. So the one exception I can think of is if someone's really willing to pick fruit. A lot of the agriculture producers, they have housing on the property for people who will sit there during the harvesting season, just spend all day picking strawberries or harvesting whatever it is, right? Because they just need as many people as are willing to just harvest the fruit, right? Because the sheer volume of like fruit and vegetables from some of these farms is so high that if they don't get it harvested in time, they can't harvest it and it goes rotten, and that sucks. That's money on the table that they're losing. The main issue I see there for is just a question of transportation, because some of these jobs are so remote, they're out of the way. Because the U.S. is such a big country
Yep.
that to even get there, like I'm sure there are people out there given the opportunity would pick strawberries all day, right, and make enough money to live, but they may not even know the opportunity exists or how to get there. How to get there because
Right.
there's no bus. What bus is going to drive 150 miles, whatever, to the middle of the countryside? Could there be? Sure, there could, right? If we had a competent, effective government structure that actually paid closer attention to this kind of thing, because they whinge all the time. Oh, we need workers. Oh, we need work. But the infrastructure isn't necessarily in place to get the people who would do the job to the job, right? Some of the people who need the work the most probably don't own cars, right? If you're so in need of like manual labor of picking fruit at some of these locations at minimum wage or near to it, odds are pretty good you don't own a car, you don't own a bike, you don't own a motorcycle. And how do you get there? This is an issue I faced for judging at debate tournaments. I would gladly judge at any debate tournament that wanted me and would pay for whatever the amount is for the day. I just can't get there and get home in time, right? Because debate tournaments go to late at night and they start early in the morning, right? There's no way. There's no, I don't own a car. I can't afford a car. So there's no practical way for me to show up, judge for 10 or 12 hours or whatever. On Saturdays, sometimes it's 6 a.m. to the latest I judged was 11 p.m. So you do the math on how long that is.
That's too late. Was that at U of O?
No, no, that's a lot of tournaments run that long. But they would use me as a judge for final rounds because I had so much experience as a judge, right? So you want the judge who has a lot of judging experience to judge the final rounds. It's just like contiguous tournament after like hundreds of tournaments of judging. That's a lot of my judging resume was very prolific. I was at a lot of tournaments, right? So the point there is there was no way I was going to do it unless I had there's no way I can do it unless I have reliable transportation. Because here's the thing: if they let me sit on a bench or something and just like take a nap at the school overnight, and then I just be there right for the next day, sure, I do it. Right? If I went there Friday, judged, and then just stayed, and then judged the next day, okay, and then figured out transportation home, however long it took, okay, it's the turnaround. The problem is that if I take a bus somewhere, they don't have buses at midnight or whatever, and then I'd have to get back in 2 hours. No, I can't. It's not feasible because a lot of these tournaments are just like way out of the way. They're hundreds of miles away from where I live.
And then they're like, a lot of them are in suburbia too, so you gotta wait like an hour between buses anyway.
Honestly, look, there are ways around that. The way that I can think of that would be the most effective is what they do for things like track and field. You have one central location you go to, a stadium or something, and then everybody can just go to that one location connected to all the buses or something. The problem is that for debate, these tournaments also function as fundraisers. So they want them at their own schools so that they can charge the fees and the entry fees and sell concessions at that school. And that's the trade off. But I know for a fact I would gladly have continued judging if I just don't have effective ways to get to tournaments. That's just me. But that's the whole point. If you don't have effective public transportation infrastructure to where the actual jobs are, then there's always going to be a shortage of available labor in whatever those locations are. I know that's a huge non sequitur to what we're talking about, but actually no, it does speak to the public health issue. So if the jobs are concentrated in urban areas that are connected to the bus lines or the trains, then it increases the rate of spreading disease because people who need to go to the cities for the work may also have to use public transportation while sick to get there if they don't own a car and your only way to get to a job is a bus or a train. What are your options? That's it. And so that may in fact increase the spread of disease, and then we all pay the cost. People go in the emergency room, of people getting sick or sicker from the flu or things like that. And what's really bizarre about the US, one of the things you mentioned for people dying is kidney disease. Dialysis is effectively free for anybody who needs it in the United States. It's one of the only universal health programs that do exist. I don't know if they change
Yes.
it with the big beautiful bill where they require it would be cruel to require a work requirement for someone who has to physically be on dialysis for hours a day. But that's one of the rare exceptions where the United States provides, as far as I understand it, or did for a long time, maybe it still does, is free or near free access to dialysis for people who need it, who have to get dialysis to live. Why can't we do this for all the diseases? I don't know. Why are people rationing insulin who need it to survive when they have diabetes? What's that? If we know that somebody needs something to exist, an inhaler, insulin, right, some medicine, why are they charged 10 times more, 12 times more, 100 times more than other people around the world? Are we uniquely situated to be inflicted with suffering and cruelty? Is that the American way to suffer needlessly? That's what I don't get. Like, why is our political system so ineffective that Americans have to suffer needlessly so others can get filthy rich, ludicrously, extravagantly rich? Does anyone need 10
Yeah.
houses or 3 yachts or a helicopter and a submarine, right, on the backs of the suffering and the poor? I don't know. Why are the rates of bankruptcy so high for medical debt and bills? It's not that way in other countries. Most of the countries of the world, as far as I understand it, don't have a huge number of people declaring bankruptcy, all of their money, because of medical debt, right? So why us? What makes us so special?
Yeah, why us? Why me? It reminds me of that movie Time Bandits. Have you seen it?
No, I've seen it available. I just never watched it.
That was one of my grandma's favorite movies. The one who said, "Bud, many people don't know how to put on their socks. Here is how you put on your socks." She had a whole method, but one of her favorite movies was Time Bandits, and another one was Waterworld.
I like
Showed
Waterworld.
my wife what. I showed my wife Waterworld, and with the time we got to, oh no, Kevin Costner. Spoiler about Waterworld. Stop if you haven't seen Waterworld yet and you want to see it. Kevin Costner's got gills, and ew. It was a good movie. Okay, but the Time Bandits, they were like, if you have the ability to travel time, what else is there to do but get filthy, stinking rich? Yeah, but maybe we got all these diseases. We got all these threats of the natural world, whether it's fires or floods or earthquakes or the big one. And we have problems of technology too. Like, what's AI gonna do? And what's your Waymo car gonna do when it doesn't have an escape hatch? That kind, and people on TikTok and all of that. We have technology problems of technology. We have problems of nature. We have problems of disease. All of these problems of science we really should get to. But we have the overarching problem, which is the problem of societal organization, where we have the ability to deal with a lot of these problems, but not the money and not the political will. And it's like the central issue of many people's lives so far in the 21st century.
Sure, the debt is used as a foil, the national debt, to not pursue these enterprises. So there was a time where there was a plan to pay down the U.S. debt. At the end of the Clinton administration, they had a whole plan in place. They had a surplus. They said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pay down the deficit. We're going to pay down the debt. We're going to make life better for everybody. It's going to be great. And lo and behold, what happens? In comes the Republican administration, crashes the debt, puts us into huge wars. It has a giant financial crisis, right? Just complete, total system failure in regards to our economic and financial situation for the country. And now we're left picking up the pieces 17 years or so later from, I guess, 18 now. Still picking up the pieces from the Great Recession, from the debt accumulated from Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's okay, why didn't we just pay down the debt? Part of the issue for why we don't have something like universal health care or any of these really robust social programs is they constantly whinge and whine. Oh, there's not enough money. There's not enough money to go around. We can't do it because the interest on the debt's too high and the deficit.
We're on a fixed income as a country. We have to wait for Social Security to come. Oh my gosh.
Yes, in that regard, the sort of incompetence of the political leadership is on full display. That we keep having these shutdown fights and the debt ceiling and all these things where it's like, why not just pay it? What is the impediment? What's going on? We're not in any major war. The whole point that I'm making is that there were opportunities to fix this, and for political reasons, they didn't. And so I guess my question is, why is our politics so cruel, right? Why is there a political party so obsessed with inflicting pain on people, right? That's what I don't get. Right now, if you look at this healthcare fight, the question isn't how do we give people better healthcare? It's should we double everybody's healthcare who needs it is on these subsidies for a program that gives them access to healthcare. That's the debate. And right now, one side is very committed to no, to not helping anybody who needs help from these subsidies. So then, what's the alternative? Just suffer, not have healthcare? That's where we're headed. And so that's what I've still struggled to understand is why is there so much cruelty for one political party? How did they get there? Why are they there? How are they still successful as a party when cruelty is apparently the point? That to inflict suffering on people. I still I struggle to I get it that hate is a strong motivator for some segment of the population for voting. That with enough, who was the author that I think it was it Mark Twain that said if you give the poorest person someone to hate, you can rob their pockets on the way down, like while you're there doing it. Something to that.
That sounds like Mark Twain.
Yeah, there's some quote I'm thinking of that's something along those lines. I think it was Steinbeck that the U.S. is a country full of temporary embarrassed millionaires, right? That you have all these people voting directly against their own self-interest to lead to tax cuts to the very tippy top wealthiest for no apparent reason, or the estate tax. Like, how many people realistically are ever going to be multi-billionaires? Not everyone. It's not going to happen.
I would guess no greater, yeah, unless they totally crash the dollar, no greater than 50,000 in this century. I am thinking if there are all these diseases going around, and if, like, commute time is an issue, and auto deaths are an issue, and not enough buses are an issue, that this is just going to be very unpopular of me to suggest. So go ahead and light me up or whatever. I don't care. It's fine. I think it might be time to consider some kind of partial hybridization in terms of more stuff on Zoom again. Maybe in flu season, maybe in COVID season, for those who can, for the non-essential, because it's so unfortunate because some things are just in person, and what do you do? They should probably be paid more. Remember when we respected essential workers for that brief moment? It was a terrible time in this country, and yet we're like, oh, here's to the essential workers. A toast. I'm raising my hand. Raising my imaginary glass. Here's my real glass. There we go. Here's to the essential workers. For real. Thanks, folks.
You're not alone in the idea that we should be doing more remote work. Remember the metaverse? That there was a push to get us all in the AI space, or not AI, the virtual reality space, and work and whatever the metaverse is, but that didn't pan out because I guess people don't quite like it.
Yeah, they don't. The metaverse by the company Meta is its own product, and not very good in my judgment, but it's a good idea. If you remember to go outside.
At an absolute minimum, it would be safer, right? That you'd reduce the incidence of workplace violence if there's nobody physically proximate to each other, period. That, I think, for any job that could be transitioned to remote work or to AI, not AI, to virtual reality, if it can be done, I don't necessarily disagree with doing it. The problem is that our economy is so tied to the physical infrastructure that part of the reason you have this push to return to the office is as like a gift of between the rich people to each other of renting out these spaces and creating a use for them. because otherwise these properties would remain vacant. And lest we forget, a lot of these wealthy people are heavily invested in each other, in stocks and in various types of capital investments, where you may not necessarily know just how invested someone is in something, but they may be a hidden or partial owner in a restaurant, in an apartment
Mm-hmm.
building. Think of all these equity firms that are buying up these residential homes.
Yeah. Hate
People
that.
invest in those. Rich people, very wealthy people, invest into those equity firms, right? In those hedge funds, expecting a return. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
remove the incentive on the part of people to live in a physical place or to work in a physical place, then all of those investments start cascading downwards, right?
Yeah.
If there's no demand for something that is a supply, right, that was being met in terms of the monetary demand, especially for rents and commercial spaces, then it's going to
Mm-hmm.
upend certain segments of the economy that people are heavily invested in, right? So it's this sort of like
Yeah.
loop of us being kept in what may be called like a negative situation in terms of transportation or in terms of working in an office for money that people are heavily invested in, especially real estate is the one I'm thinking of, that people spend an awful lot of money on buying real estate and on renting out real estate. And
Mm-hmm.
look, that can be volatile. Look at how many times Trump properties declared bankruptcy over the course of his career. Right? I don't know that he himself declared bankruptcy, but a whole lot of the businesses he was associated with sure did.
He'll sue you if you say he was bankrupt,
No, I
but
don't
there were bankruptcies.
I don't think he himself personally was ever bankrupt,
No.
but
No.
it's very clear, it's on public record, that businesses associated with him went bankrupt, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it's a very volatile, the world of capitalism is a very volatile, risky endeavor. You're not guaranteed to make a return. But what is clear is that when they did the remote work during COVID, that cost some companies a lot of money when they
Yeah.
didn't have the in-person physical buildings occupying their rental spaces, their properties. That's just a fact. But also, the other issue, remember during COVID, the businesses that were hit the most were the small businesses that relied on a steady stream of customers during the day who are commuting into the city. So coffee shops, restaurants, stores that relied on a stable consumer base to provide their profit margin. If you don't have that constant stream of people showing up to the central business districts, spending money, then you don't have a customer base. And so it's all interconnected. And yeah, that's the story of technological change. We don't have a huge number of people with horses and buggies anymore. And most people aren't riding horses around anymore. So that whole business collapsed. You figure out a way to keep going. But yeah, I definitely agree that it would be safer, it would probably be healthier to move to remote work, especially people would be happier that they have less of a commute. And also, if you're talking about safety, think of how many you were listing the causes of death. One of those was accidents, right? It was road injury.
Yeah.
Think of how
Definitely.
many people wouldn't be commuting if we just transitioned to a much more work from home, remote work economy, right? If you're
Yeah.
not driving, you're not risking getting hit by a car.
Yeah, and maybe go in 3 times every 2 weeks or so, because with COVID, it was a little too much. But yeah, not everybody has to go in, but maybe you have the option to do, because it's a lot less stress on the individual for things that frankly can be done and probably will be done a little bit faster if you don't have to have 3 conversations on the way to your desk and have an hour-long commute round trip or one way for some people, or if you don't have to deal with the delays of the subway or anything else. As far as the houses go, I think if corporations, etc., are going to own like apartments or office buildings or whatever land, or you can't really do so much about that, but the U.S. already does incentivize the participation of individuals in the housing market, and if we could turn that up while we also turned up the pressure on non-human, on corporate or company-based ownership of houses, maybe we'd said it a little better. I don't know exactly what you do, but maybe you just impose a tax on it. You just go to a house. Is this house listed to a human? Yeah, no, 10% tax. Whatever, you just do something like that. I don't know. Homes as investments, particularly owned by, like, hedge funds, non-people. If there's going to be people with second homes, I don't propose doing anything about that, but yeah, a lot of non-people own homes, which is not something you want.
At the end of the day, we need something like a universal healthcare system or some way to allow people access to better healthcare to reduce the incidence of the spread of contagious disease. That's just the simple reality of it. The US doesn't do as good a job as it could compared to other countries in reducing the spread of disease, and that makes life more expensive for everyone, right? Because we ultimately pay for emergency room visits when people cannot afford to pay. And the way that we do that is when hospitals either declare bankruptcy or they seek money from the government through things like Medicaid or other services to pay for treating people because of EMTALA. But ultimately, we all pay when someone is really sick and has to go to the emergency room to get seen. And it would be less expensive for everybody if people get more access to preventative care, right? If right when they get sick, they get access to the medicine or the treatment or whatever, the advice needed to help endure the course of the disease such that they don't end up in the hospital or they don't face the very real prospect of serious illness or death. Because we all pay as a society when these worse outcomes occur. And it's all interconnected too. So part of the reason that some people become homeless is because of medical expenses. They get very sick from something like cancer or a chronic illness, and they don't get the help that they necessarily need to survive in this world if they lose their job. Disability sometimes covers it, but it takes a really long time to get disability coverage or insurance or payments. It takes a really long time. You have to submit it, and then if you get denied, you have to appeal the decision until you get accepted, and it can take a very long time. And in between the then and the then of losing someone's job and getting on disability, there's the very real prospect of facing all sorts of problems, getting sicker, becoming homeless. And it's just a constant. They talk about the cycle of poverty. It's this kind of thing. It's where one thing happens and then it cascades into a lot of little things that lead into a big thing. You lose your car, or you lose your job, or you lose your house, and then it just adds and adds until eventually someone ends up homeless, sick, with a disease that is contagious, so it gets spread to other people. And if they have no car, they use public transportation. If they have no job, they go to shelters. And if everybody goes to the shelter that's sick, and then everybody at the shelter gets sick, and it just adds and adds. If you want to reduce things like crime, okay, if you want to reduce the incidence of crime or make a society safer, universal healthcare, 100%. That'll do it. That'll make everything safer and better and a lot less stress and sadness all around.
So it's an old refrain. We pay a lot, and what we pay for the privilege in terms of insurance, and then we pay a lot for the procedures and for the drugs. And then on top of all that, the outcomes that we get aren't very good. And it's because of the greater problem of political lack of a common will or common goal. So, as I say, the dismal situation continues apace. Do you want to talk about carbon copy of butter?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about the artificial butter.
Yeah, so the NBC story was that there's an Illinois company that makes this, like, equivalency of butter, which is made with methane and other chemicals. And apparently they can manufacture certain foods, including butter, foie gras, which I didn't know how to spell, salmon, and cocoa. They can make, like, the equivalencies of these things. Very minor quibble with NBC's reporting. The reporter said that the future is happening one bite at a time. And I thought, maybe I should mention that my day is happening 1 second at a time. And that other people should say, yeah, my drive to work, it went 1 inch at a time. But would you eat lab food?
I'm actually all
Okay.
for this. So the biggest argument for veganism is that we eat food at the cost of the suffering of animals. And this is the alternative to that we can
Hmm.
still have food or food like substances that doesn't actually involve the death of an animal, any kind of thinking being. And I'm all for it ethically, philosophically. If we could get to a point where we transition away from the domestication of animals for slaughter, great. If we can get to that point where you don't have to actually hunt or kill animals in order to get sufficient nutrients for everyone, then that seems like the most ethically and philosophically moral action to take. That the world would be a much better place if there's less suffering inflicted on animals, because at the point where we have a viable replacement at cost, it's needless suffering of it. It's just unnecessary suffering of animals. I understand why it happens in the current day because of the expense and because there's supply and demand. They're allowed to do it, and so they do it. But there's always been an ethical argument against the slaughter of animals for food, right? That these are thinking, feeling creatures that have social groups, that have what you could call a soul. It just makes the world a more cruel and sad place, the fact that it happens. I'm all for lab created meat, lab created butter, lab created whatever, because it doesn't involve killing anything. Period.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've liked veggie patties since I was a kid. Frankly, I thought they're pretty good. There was in the teens. I think it was a setback because they had the Impossible Burger, but it wasn't very good. I didn't like it. I thought that was not the best burger. You should not be discouraged from pursuing a technology just because you face certain pitfalls or temporary things. And I think that generally, pending some testing and pending, like, just making sure that it works, that these are positive developments. I would also say that there should be, and we should be okay with a higher price of meat if the animals suffer less, or if they have, like, good lives, let's say. There's a spectrum from factory farming to something better, more free range, and that we should be okay with that.
Yeah, massaging the cows and singing to them and feeding them
Never thought of that.
feeding them grass and letting them roam free range instead of keeping them penned up and spending their whole life
Yeah.
locked in a box.
And one other thing, there's a cattle farm at about in Southern California on I-5, exit about 200, and it smells bad, man. That's just awful. Ugh, jeez.
Can't imagine that lab grown food would create an odor of any kind, right?
No.
And one other thing to think about, I think about this a lot, is that there's an awful lot of land allocated to grazing and raising animals for
Sure.
domestication. You want to talk about
Yeah.
something like homelessness, if we could transition that land to anything else, like housing, you would have
Uh-huh.
a lot. Look, part of the issue with housing is that available land is expensive and scarce. If that is reduced, if there's more land freed up for other endeavors, I don't see a downside. Look, the whole reason that we eat domesticated animals and rely on domesticated animals for food is because it's a cheaper option than the alternative now. You're right. It's to a point where it becomes cheaper for the technology to be more ubiquitous. I don't see a reason why we would have to keep eating so much food from live animals that are slaughtered. It's not that big of a difference. And in terms of taste, condiments and spices can go a long way to making something more
Hmm.
palatable. But also, I wonder if it's healthier, right? I wonder for lab grown food if you can
That's
make
what
it
I'm wondering about too.
more genetically safer, less subject to diseases that would come from food from chickens and cows and stuff, and also just healthier in general. You could take out the bad stuff and keep in the good stuff. That's what I'm curious about is if they can do that, because if they can, it's not just like better ethically, it's just better from a health
Hmm.
perspective. I don't see a down. I'm all for it. I like science.
Mondays
Bye bye.
with Mike.